I have some pictures that I dug out today that go along with my story. And these pictures here, my story is called My Mother. And this is my mother. I'll just tell you about it. It says on the back, my mother at age 9 holding a doll. And I will tell you a little bit about that in my story. And this is my mother in Los Angeles, 1927.
With some tint added to the picture.
Yeah, this is a nice picture. And I think she's very classy looking. This is my mother in 1930. And she was married in 1930. I'll tell you about that in the story. I gave that one first, but this one is 1928. She graduated as an RN from the hospital, Los Angeles General Hospital, and I'm going to tell you about that. And then this one is when she was maybe in her late 80s. And in my story, I'm going to talk about her having me as a baby, and this is me at 3 months. I like the old buggy there. And I guess I've always had a laugh on my face because I'm laughing here. I don't know exactly how old I was. This one says, this is in Los Angeles on Coleman Avenue, and I'm going to tell you about that. Okay. My mother, Ada Margaret Morris Swanson, lived a very long life as she died at age 98, almost 99. She spent most of her life taking care of others as she was a nurse, having graduated from Los Angeles County Hospital with her RN degree in 1928. I'm not sure why she decided to become a nurse, but I remember she told me she still played with dolls at age 12. She met my father while living at the home of Mrs. Barrett, a dear friend who had a home on Coleman Avenue in Monterey Park near Arroyo Seco. Now, I'm telling some details here because I'm writing this for my grandchildren, and I want them to know these details. The high school and college, Los Angeles Pacific, now Azusa Pacific University, in a different location, was at the top of the hill. Mom had gone to high school there. The small area called Herman, the small area was called Herman, and a large Free Methodist church was nearby where she attended. Her best friend was Cora Young. Cora was very outgoing and decided to go into nursing and persuaded my mother to do the same, a very good decision. My mom was always precise about being neat, clean, and loved to be well dressed. After my mother and dad were married, they planned to buy a lot and build a house and settle in Los Angeles. They must have had many friends there, as a funny prank was played on them while they were on their honeymoon. They rented a little bungalow on Coleman Avenue and were married in the front yard of their new home. My mother wanted music at her wedding, and since the Free Methodist Church did not allow instruments to play in their services at that time, they chose the front yard setting for their wedding. A friend made the wedding cake, which was on the table in the house, and while the wedding was going on, a dog came in and took a large bite out of the cake. Mom's friends quickly fixed it with cardboard and frosted over it, and she never knew about the near disaster until later. While on their honeymoon, Mom and Dad stopped in Fresno to buy her a wedding ring, as the Free Methodist Church did not allow, quote, quote, the wearing of gold. They were headed for Turlock to see my dad's parents, who were Swedish Lutherans and wouldn't understand the lack of a wedding ring. After a week or two on their trip, they headed back to LA, and as they drove near their new home, they saw large letters fastened to the top of the roof that spelled out, quote, quote, "Just married, watch us grow." My dad was mortified, and his first action was to grab a ladder and tear down that humiliating sign. This was September 1930. They were married on September 2nd. I was born July 28th, 1932. My mom didn't want me to be born in a hospital, so she made arrangements for her delivery at a maternity home nearby where a midwife took care of patients for the 2 weeks of hospital stay that was the practice at that time. A doctor was on call for the actual delivery. My mother had a nurse friend who was an invalid and bedridden, perhaps from polio, I don't know. I have a picture of her someplace, but I didn't find it for this. She asked Mom if she could name the new baby. So I was named Joy Yvonne Swanson, Yvonne spelled E-V-O-N. I must have thrived in that lovely area of Los Angeles, as I have many pictures of a happy little girl. My grandparents on my mother's side lived in Ontario at that time, Ontario, California, so they would take me home to their place from time to time. I was always closer to my Grandma and Grandpa Morris than I was Grandma and Grandpa Swanson. Part of that, I think, was because I was the only grandchild. I called my grandmothers Little Grandma and Big Grandma. When I was 18 months old, my mother was pregnant with another child, but was suffering from toxemia, and just before her delivery date, gave birth to a stillborn little boy they called Donald. She nearly died from this pregnancy and was blind for a time. After a lengthy stay in the hospital, she came home to me and my dad, but I didn't recognize her, and she went through much grief. She didn't talk much about that terrible time. Later, after their move to Turlock, she prayed for another child, and when I was 5 years old, she and Daddy had my brother Jerry with no complications, an answer to her prayer. The move to Turlock came when I was 3 years old. Grandpa Swanson bought 40 acres of land for my folks on Central Avenue, 6 miles west of Turlock, out West Main Road. My mother wanted to keep working at Los Angeles General Hospital so she could buy a refrigerator and furniture. My folks took me up to Modesto to stay with my dad's sister, Aunt Ivy, and my Grandma Swanson. That time was my first recollection. I remember my dad and Grandpa building our 2-room house on our new farm. They later built a large barn and bought cows and planted crops. It was very sandy soil and difficult to grow crops, as the wind would blow out the alfalfa seeds and sprouts. I also remember staying with Grandma Swanson in the old farmhouse on Crow's Landing Road. I tried to help with the dishes by climbing up and washing my grandma's watch. We settled into life in rural Turlock, where I attended Mountain View School, where my father had gone through the 8th grade. Mom was making friends in the neighborhood with 2 families of Turners, Carmen and Goldie, and Fletcher and Mabel. There was another family down the road, the Olsons. Mr. Everett Olson was a brother to Goldie and Mabel.